Alright, we have two movies this week. We were gonna have three because I started that Netflix movie, Game Over Man, and I, after about 10 minutes of that, I came to the conclusion that I think from now on I'll just do the Netflix movies if I happen to hear really, really good things about them, because it seems like 99% of the time we get movies like Game Over Man or Stepsisters, so yeah. So we'll just focus on that in regards to those movies. But in the meantime, let's go to the theatrically released ones. I'm still kind of surprised we have two movies. I was prepared to do Pacific Rim by itself, and then I was really surprised that Unsane actually went wide. And after having seen it, I'm really surprised it went wide. But we're gonna go back a little bit and start with Pacific Rim Uprising. So there was obviously kind of a lot of negativity surrounding this movie, starting off with the fact that Del Toro had nothing to do with it. Which, yeah, is going to be a big drawback. And then apparently, when the trailers came out, they were heavily criticized, saying that the effects looked really subpar, the characters looked uninteresting, and pretty much anything and everything you would expect when you see that somebody made a sequel to Pacific Rim without Del Toro. But, I was also thinking, like, obviously, I love Pacific Rim. I've seen it, like, a million times at this point. Reviewed it twice on this channel alone. And, I wasn't really that bent out of shape in regards to, well, yeah, what Del Toro did was great, obviously, but I mean, what could possibly, be so bad in a movie like this? Especially if it's trying to follow Pacific Rim, and you'd think, well, obviously that'll make it look even worse if it's trying to follow Pacific Rim. But I mean, it seemed like Pacific Rim maybe opened a door to if you want to continue that movie even without its original creators, it'll at least give you what you want. Because what you really want out of a movie like Pacific Rim is the whole giant robots beating the fuck out of giant monsters. And you think that's it. But then, well, number one, obviously, with Del Toro, you're always going to have a little more than that. And secondly, this movie and watching it kind of shows you that there is a specific difference in regards to how you execute that, no matter how simple the concept seems. So when we start off, it's John Boyega giving us this. He's now replacing, despite the fact that he is playing the son of Idris Elba's character, he's basically replacing the Charlie Hunnam character in the story. So there's that. But then the intro happens, and in case you're confused as to which character he's basically replacing from the first movie, his opening narration is pretty much the exact same opening narration from the first movie. We even get some of the exact same footage, like the underwater with the fish as it breaks apart. Yeah, only it's like really, really sped up, really, really cut down, and then it ends with, oh yeah, and my dad was Stagger Pentecost, but I'm not my father. And then it's like, oh, he's some party animal dude. That's also hangs out with some shady crowds in some shady areas. So we got that old thing. But as they continue to introduce this, I felt like there was still a little bit of hope, because I kind of liked what they were doing, kind of showing the world. Obviously, it's looks a lot different than it did through Del Toro's eyes, but I mean, when you get to see, because in the first movie, it's kind of like we're mostly, the only time we weren't doing the whole giant monsters and robots fighting thing, and we weren't like in their, barracks or whatever, just that one building. There wasn't a whole lot we saw of the rest of the world. Like, we saw where Raleigh worked, and then we saw, like, when we saw Hannibal Chow and everything that was going on with him. But still, it felt like, sure, you can expand on this. You could show how normal people have reacted to the carnage. And that seems to be what this movie's trying to do at its start. We've got, like, the cool stuff like the giant, kaiju skeleton or whatever, and how, like, almost a civilization has been built within it or next to it. It's just part of this world now, the whole aftermath of all the shit that's gone down. And But the thing about that, though, is that as it goes on, and we get, like, into these junkyard kids and all that, you start to have flashbacks, because when Pacific Rim first came out, the people who didn't care for it, the big question was, what is it that people love about Pacific Rim that they hate about Transformers? Well, with this, you basically get to see one become the other. And you will see the difference, I would hope, especially if you watch them back-to-back. And not just in concept. Not just, oh, it's a giant robot movie, I immediately think of Transformers. No, it kind of goes the extra mile, especially if you saw the last Transformers movie. Where it's, you remember the things that were, I mean, I know, like, everything was wrong about those, but, I mean, when you look at the stuff that was, like, the worst parts of that last Transformers movie, like how they decided to start focusing on these kid characters that lived in junkyards. Well, Pacific Rim Uprising pretty much goes the same way. Little junkyard kids who are actually, you know, tough or whatever, find their way into the story and end up basically becoming our heroes, as the actual heroes of the movie end up periodically taking a backseat whenever the plot requires. The heroes in this case being John Boyega and Scott Eastwood, who still has yet to find his personality. Just kind of like looking and squinting like your dad isn't kind of, you gotta kind of do something else to make anything you do memorable whatsoever. But yes, and then there's stuff like, and it does kind of seem like it's really, and it's really hard to say what's dumbed down depending on who you ask about the first movie. But the thing is that the first movie kind of had this intentional B-movie thing, and kind of the way it, like, really seemed to take itself seriously, but could be really fun and over the top at the same time. But the characters within it seeming to take it seriously is where the seriousness factor really comes in. Like, you don't really get a vibe that the filmmakers thought it was serious, but the characters playing it straight kind of adds to that sort of gigantic B-movie quality that's actually works within the context. And here, they're just kind of trying to embrace the more, I don't want to necessarily say their Michael Bay side, but I mean, so you look at Pacific Rim, and then you look at Pacific Rim Uprising, and then you realize, in this movie, Jaegers can give the finger now. So, take that for what you will in regards to which column you put that in, but I think I know where I put it. So, like I said, not to just name drop Michael Bay or anything, but because it's so easy. But I really felt like that's the direction we were headed in a not so good way. There's certainly good aspects to Michael Bay, but I'm not talking about any of those at all. So, and we go into the whole thing about, he's like, I'm not training any damn kids, and it becomes that. It's like John Boyega basically takes part in his own fucking Cop and a Half, only it's somebody who he's going to train to work Jaegers and shit. It goes in, there's a whole lot of cliches that pile up here, and not the good kind. Not the good kind that we saw in the first movie. Obviously, the first movie is full of them, too, but once again, that just fit the whole kind of vibe they had going on. Like, it was all planned that way, to feel that way. And in this, you don't really get the same vibe that they have a particular direction they even plan on going in regards to their tone. Because when they take it serious, it feels like everybody's taking it serious, but they also want to be goofy often, like really often. Like everybody's like a sarcastic mugging character, but even with that though, they don't want to, like, when it gets to the point that they try to have legitimate emotional scenes, they do feel really half-assed. And when it seems like they might be taking a risky turn, given how some characters might be handled, it feels less like, oh, they went there, and more like, that just kind of seems like a lazy way to, you know, inject some kind of forced emotion into this. But even doing what you do doesn't really make that work. It still feels very... Number one, it feels like some characters are extremely wasted because of it. And secondly, it's just like, you can kind of see through that attempt and why they would do that to a certain character. And it's like, but that payoff did not come around. Like, when the scene where it's supposed to, it's just like, well, yeah, you went and did that, but now I'm just kind of more irritated than anything else. I'm not feeling particularly sad about it or anything, so that's a problem. And obviously, talking about the new characters, the old characters mostly are barely there, if at all, or just in archive footage. The new characters aren't bringing a whole lot of anything. It's John Boyega doing his thing, Scotty Swid just looking like he's doing stuff, but physically, but here, just nothing, dead. And then we have some new characters that we do bring back that are quite crucial, like Geisler and Gottlieb, Charlie Day and Bern Gorman. So, and I don't quite know what has been... I mean, obviously, like, the whole arc of the movie is what has happened to Geisler's character, but I mean, even so, like, the first few scenes with him, it's just like, okay, he doesn't feel the same in an odd way. I mean, obviously, you know, perhaps it would be a little boring if he just came back and did the same old thing with this character, because obviously Charlie Day is always... I mean, I've never disliked him in a movie, but he's always reaching that line of always doing the same thing. But here, when he does show up, and it does seem like he's doing something different, it just seems off. And when it's... And it feels like such a weird change to the character. So that was bothering me for a while, but then eventually you learn why he's acting different, and that's basically where the whole movie jumps off. I don't know. I just don't particularly... I don't think it's the greatest idea. I mean, on paper, possibly, but I mean, given his... I mean, and they do try to kind of use it like there were maybe little seeds that were planted in the first movie for this, like his obsession with the kaiju could maybe have led to something like this. But, I don't know, it still just feels really... Wow, that's left field. Did you take this character in that direction, regardless of what happened to him? So that was really... It's something I kind of wish I was on board with. And it's not even necessarily... I'm sure this is probably the problem a lot of people have, but it's not my problem with it. It's not that Charlie Day can't sell this. I mean, he might be struggling a little bit, but I mean, it's... I don't know, it just feels so wrong for the character that we saw before, and like such a drastic direction that just doesn't really feel like there was much getting from one point to the other. And like I said, they try to piece it together with stuff that happened in the first movie, but it's just not really coming together much. I mean, they kind of do that with Gottlieb's character, but he basically just says, you know, like, I still have nightmares after that shit. And they just leave it at that. He's really not that much different, and for the better, really. And so, that's basically it as far as character. And I know I might be dwelling on character a lot, because it's like, you kind of say... The character interactions in the first movie were by no means strong. So, but there was still something about them. And it's just really... The character interactions weren't great, and the characters did feel like types, but it still felt like they each had individual personalities, at least. And yeah, you did have the cliché rivalries in that one, too. But here, the cliché rivalries are just that. They don't even feel like, oh, this is the part where they have the rivalry, and we know this story. But I mean, over here, it's just like they literally just kind of cut it out and just stuck it on there, and there's just nothing going on. There's no particular reason for it, either. At least with Pacific Rim, we have the payoff of, like, you know, the dude goes out with Pentecost and the whole shit happens. But I mean, here, there's really not much of a point to it. It's like, here's our attempt to make these characters do something that's outside of just what they're supposed to do, to give them a little bit of life in the event that we might actually give the slightest fuck when they're in battle, but it's just not there. Not these characters at all. It was sort of reminding me, like, because here's the thing, is, another thing about the first movie is it feels like its own world. And it has this really, really distinct look. One of my favorite scenes in the past decade, probably, is the big old fight scene where it's like all the lights in the city and it's like raining, and they throw in those little things like the using a ship as a baseball bat practically, or the falling through the buildings just to make the little ball thing happen. Um, but there's no personality to any of these things in this one. Like the fighting is, if you can even call it fighting, it's more like they're just kind of blasting each other from a safe distance, and then occasionally they'll like hit something. But for the most part, it just feels like weapons, not just like this whole brawl thing that was going on that made the first one so appealing. And about it feeling like it's in its own world as well. It's like even when we're in like the one building where they live, basically, even though it's not like the most exciting set or anything, it felt like it was its own thing. In this one, it's like they're on the set of Ender's Game, and there's just it just immediately strips away anything that it could have had to like call its own, while also continuing this, and that just makes it all the more. It makes it even more bland than if they had tried to recreate what Del Toro was doing in his vision. Um, so that's the thing, is you start to add it up and you're like, so what was really a win scenario with this movie? What could they have really done with what they had, without, just flat out saying, just scrap it all together, bring Del Toro back, let them do their whole thing, him and his co-writer. But yeah, you look at it as is, and it sucks because it's like John Boyega, it's like his first big producer credit, and he's been like real psyched about it in his promotion and all that. And he makes you want to see it succeed, but it's just it's just really not bringing it, unfortunately. Um, and they do try to inject these things. Like I said, everybody's being so goofy amongst themselves, regardless of all this. Where it's like the ice cream scene. There's a very prolonged scene where John Boyega's just making ice cream. And it's one of those cases where it's like, that probably sounds funny. I can't even say it sounds funny on paper. It sounds funny if you're joking around about ideas in the writing room before you actually write something down. That it made it to paper is kind of astonishing. That it made it to screen is even more so, when you see that it's just this directionless attempt to inject humor where it just doesn't work. Once again, I think that's kind of an attempt at making the character seem likable and all that, and adding different traits to him, but it just works as this really awkwardly, I think they may have thought this was funny kind of reaction from an audience, but yeah, or maybe it works for you, I don't know. But then there's like one of the first times we see Charlie Day, and he's talking about Stagger Pentecost, and he's like, oh yeah, your dad was a great speechwriter. He did the whole, canceling the apocalypse thing. And then it's like, once again, that scene worked, cheesy and cliche as it was, because it just fit the tone of the movie, and you had Idris Elba delivering it, and it just kind of worked in itself. And then here, you basically have Geisler, like, it's almost like this movie is talking down to the first movie, as if it's like trying to take that moment away from it by saying, it's like, oh yeah, wasn't that silly in like a B movie or anything? It's not like that's what the movie was trying to be or anything. Oh, that's so silly. Now let's go and do our, worthwhile story here. So yeah, I'm just clearly not feeling that. And they also kind of do that at the taking away from the first movie to get a joke out thing with, it's like, let's say you're watching the first movie, kind of like I was recently again, and it's like, you realize that, when they're like drifting together, they have, they can see basically inside each other's minds. That's how it works. And it crosses your mind briefly, it's like, oh, so do they see everything in their minds? And then that thought just kind of passes once you entertain it. But then this movie absolutely positively must address that and make it this whole thing where we're trying to build up to this whole thing, and it's just, hey, I'm inside your mind, right? You better quit thinking about that girl now. And it's, you're making this as uncool as you possibly can. Everything that was so incredibly, undeniably awesome in the first movie, and it's like you're just trying to make it those ideas that already exist and try to make them as dumb as possible. Make them as dumb as your movie. It's just really falling apart. And like I said, really, the whole feel of it is just totally different. I don't know if it's there's kind of a certain visual appeal the first movie had. Like usually when bad movies do this, where they set like their big action scenes at night, the big criticism is you can't see jack shit. But the first one did not have that problem at all. All the fight scenes, the big scenes were like at night, and they looked awesome because of like the whole kind of playing with the lights thing that they did, and all these different visuals just made it look really, really cool, and really distinctive to that movie. And in this one, all the battles are during the day, which basically makes it look like the climax of a Transformers or an Avengers movie, which is unfortunate. But on top of that, also, and it's I guess you could say the effects have something to do with this as well. But it's like when you watch the first movie, you can just get a sense, like that opening shot right before they show the title, when it's those people with the metal detector, and they're like this, but then when the Jaeger appears and comes down, those people turn into this. And it really gives you a feel of just the sheer mass and scope of what these fucking things are and how gigantic they actually are. And you never get that kind of feel from the ones in this movie. They just kind of seem like every other giant robot in a movie. And they do try to make Charlie Day call that out by saying, like, oh, guys, giant robots, why don't you be original? And it's like, number one, that's with like 10 minutes of the movie left. So you are way too late in being self-deprecating. Like, you've been guilty like 20 times over before you want to say, oh, by the way, we're doing the thing. And it's, no, that doesn't work that way. Um, and yeah, that's the problem. Is it's like it's not even there's not even a particular try to, like I said, really come off as its own thing. And when you see, it's like, well, just take it for what it is. It's robots fighting monsters. What else do you want? But I mean, really, once you've seen the first movie, you realize that there's more to the action than just the action. Like I said, there's the creativity they have with how they did it. There's the way it looks. Like I said, there's the much more impressive effects. Exciting battles that are like right into it. Like they are grabbing a hold of each other and fighting. They're not just shooting random weapons at each other or whatever. And with this one, it does just feel like a very generic sort of thing with no particular spark to it whatsoever. It's just the thing that people have gotten so tired of after so many Transformers and Avengers movies. The Pacific Rim brought back to life. This is kind of just the whole, yes, we have seen this before, and they're not even doing anything in particular to liven this up or make it different than what we've seen before. It's just like they thought, well, if it's these two things beating the shit out of each other, voila, that's all they want. But you can obviously tell looking at both movies, there's definitely a difference between just doing that for the sake of doing it and hope that it pays off in the way. But and yeah, for some people, I'm sure that'll be enough. But like I said, it just really kind of pales. And it would also seem, like I keep saying, the first movie, the first movie, the first movie, and all that. But I mean, even without the first movie, this would be extremely, incredibly generic. Probably even more so, actually. But yeah, that's what it is. So that's unfortunate. I was hoping it would be a lot better than people were giving it credit for as we were leading up to it, but yeah, it is. I did hear some comparisons to Independence Day Resurgence. It's not that bad. It's really not that bad, I promise, but it's really not good either. And feels quite kind of lazy in comparison, so yeah, that's what that is. Our next one is our last one. Also, is going to be Unsane, the Soderbergh movie. I don't. If I would say if you are at all interested in seeing this and you haven't yet, I don't know that you should listen to me because I don't know exactly how. I mean, I won't necessarily go into like all the details, but I feel like trying to explain some of the things that happen here and how I feel about them, I may accidentally slip up and say something that might be a little too revealing to what's going on. So if you're afraid in the slightest that might happen, I would just kind of stop here. So what's going on here is that we have so many different types of Soderbergh, and it's great. That's why I would like to think most people love Soderbergh so much, because obviously he's got some very mainstream movies with his very big name mainstream cast. Then he's got some small movies here and there. He's got some modest movies there. And then he's got some, independent movies that are kind of like, the dictionary definition of independent movie, like the first thing you think of, like Sex, Lies, and Videotape. But then we've got crazy-ass Soderbergh that just does whatever the hell he wants and experiments as much as he can. And he loves to do anything and everything with all the different filmmaking techniques that there are. He wants to, like, try every single one. And so he is not discriminatory when it comes to how you make a movie, which is fantastic. So you gotta kind of wonder what exactly kind of Soderbergh you're in for, and yes, we're going in that direction, like Crazy Ass Schizopolis, which I love so much. There is, he even got experimental once kind of doing that, documentary Grey's Anatomy. But then there's also stuff like The Girlfriend Experience that he made with Sasha Grey, and then, Bubble, the movie that he made here in this area that I live in. And so, yeah, we are getting one of those. Because at first going in, I kind of thought we were going to get, like, something in the vein of more like Side Effects. Which I liked quite a bit until that stupid-ass last 15 minutes or so where they totally ruined it. And much like he's taken a page out of Sean Baker's book now, and he's shooting it entirely with an iPhone himself. He's still under his pseudonym, but yes, that is himself as the DP. So, the thing here is that we are following Claire Foy's character, and she's this she has a very normal life. She does her job, she goes to lunch, she talks to her mom, all that stuff, but then she goes out on these weird nights, like these Tinder dates or whatever, and basically sets up for these one-night stands, and she's got this kind of dark personality, this dark sense of humor, where she's basically she says, like, it's okay to laugh about cancer, that's how I get through it. And then he says, wow, you have a dark sense of humor, and she gives off the most casual delivery of Hail Satan you have ever heard in your life. And then the movie does eventually take a turn quite quickly. And yeah, the quicker that it does it, the more the effect kind of takes on. So it is gonna, like, it just very suddenly kind of throws you into whatever the hell it is. And there is kind of a hint here in regards to when she goes on this attempted one-night stand, it goes in a direction that does make her appear a bit unhinged. So, but still, we're going to kind of play the is she or isn't she game. So she goes to this doctor's office, and everything seems normal. She's just there for, like, one thing, just one sort of, like, checkup sort of thing, or just to check things out. But then it's like she walks through a door, and it's almost like it's into another world, practically, where, like, suddenly the whole vibe sort of changes, and once she's in this room, it's like, there's the dude that's just like, I have to check your bag, and we look at this and we know what she's there for, and it's like, there's no reason for that to be the case. But maybe they just have weird policies. I guess we'll go with this, even though it's a bit off. And then another woman comes in and shuts the door and locks it, and is like, okay, disrobe for a skin examination. And it's like, don't worry, this is just for the sake of the patients. And then it's like, she realizes that the door is locked and she cannot get out. And it's like, oh, don't worry, it's for your sake, it's for your privacy. And it's like everything that is keeping her in this place and getting weirder and weirder, they're just really playing off like, don't worry, it's for you. Nothing's wrong here. And it just feels more and more off and sinister as this one scene goes. And they're like weirdly aggressive about it. And it's just really takes you into this, I don't want to say Kafka-esque, because that makes me want to punch myself in the face, but it does kind of have a similar vibe to that. Maybe the ever so slightest sliver of Lynch, possibly. And it does work in putting your mind in that position to where we are so lost once all this stuff starts happening that she is, to where it's like we don't immediately think, oh, well, she's obviously crazy, or like we've seen a movie before. We're gonna start guessing the twist now, or if there even is a twist. And so it actually does put our mind in that position of we're as clueless as she is, and how anything could be one or the other. She could be crazy. She could totally not be. Um, and it gives off like kind of a shock corridor vibe eventually once she meets the other inmates and all that, like Jay Farrow and Juno Temple and others. But what kind of sets it off is that she appears to be hallucinating a stalker that she's had, who is oh my god, I've been thinking of his name all day, and then it just Joshua Leonard. I almost forgot. From Blair Witch, of course, and a bunch of like a couple of Lynn Shelton movies. I think very much in the indie scene and really good at it. And so she's just kind of having constant visions of him. There's a really good particular scene to where it's like we see somebody who she may or may not mistake for him, but he's off camera except for like right here, and we see his face on the name tag before she even discovers it, which I thought was a really cool effect. Only problem is that it's not long in the movie before the ambiguity kind of feels like it's wearing down a little bit, and it kind of feels like we're going in a certain direction. And it's like, okay, it feels like the movie's becoming very obvious very quickly. And it's like, it seems like she's like, okay, yeah, she's very much coming off like a crazy person. And it's like, even though you still kind of think in the back of your head, oh, maybe this was a red herring or whatever, the movie makes you feel like you have it pretty early. But then there's something, and it should be like, oh, like the movie has completely turned your head around. It's completely flipped what you might be expecting. It does all this stuff. But it's revealed so not, or basically, well, yeah, revealed so nonchalantly and so early. You really, instead of being surprised or like, whoa, all you can really think is, did the movie just really play its hand that early? This this is weird. And it starts to devolve very quickly into a very kind of there's always this weird kind of different quality to it, but the way he's shot it and the way the certain scenes play themselves up, like there's still something constantly unnatural going on. But regardless of all that, at its center, it does very quickly become a standard thriller. And it's very much like, and it starts to go in some of the, well, why didn't they do this directions, and even in a movie like this, it actually gets to the point where you start to think, but this is the logical thing to do, when the movie shouldn't be that. It should be the weird, ambiguous thing that it was for a while that really sucked you into, where it's like, I don't really know what the hell's going on, or what's around the next corner, or all that, because everybody else is just as lost as we are. But then it gets to stuff like, there is a text message delivered in this movie that should pretty much solve everything. But the way they just brush that text message's existence off very quickly is weird and off-putting, and not in the way of, oh, anything can happen, or, oh, I feel like I'm in a nightmare, or all that. It just feels like that seriously could have been the solution, and we're just not even going to acknowledge it. And it's not even, it doesn't even seem like it's in like that weird sort of way, that nightmarish way. It's just like, oh no, we're just gonna do this thing now. That was for that scene, and for nothing else. Only for effect in that scene, and even though it could completely solve this whole thing, it's just gone now. Nobody saw it, apparently. And it very quickly becomes like amateur hour, which is really weird to say, because you think a movie on an iPhone, shot on an iPhone, seems amateur, but that's not at all the portion of it that seems amateur. The amateurishness comes in the writing. The writing feels like this person's first time out, which I'm pretty sure it's not. And so that really does make, like, you would think a movie this experimental that's hinged on this it's surprising how much the writing actually does come into play with the quality of the movie ends up being. Which once again is really unfortunate. So, because you've got, like I said, you've got a lot of interesting stuff going on visually. Like, there's so much in, like, close-up and all that. And there's, like they talk directly into the camera at times. And the whole style of it makes it feel, like, real, which is really important because there's the whole thing of we have to basically feel like we're inside her head and all the confusion is real. And like I said, that gives it kind of a real quality. Like if it was a really polished, sort of normal looking movie, like if it looked like Side Effects or something, or other Soderbergh's recent movies, that effect probably wouldn't be there. We wouldn't get there at least as quickly. So that really does work. Like it's not some pretentious thing he's doing. The way it's visually done and the way it's shot do wonders for the portions of the movie that do work. And I would totally trust, I can't imagine, like, the idea just doesn't come to me that Soderbergh could be pretentious. Like, that would just be a foreign concept to me, because I just love and I totally see, like, if people see Schizopolis or something, they might get that vibe, but, I mean, there's just something, I feel like I have such an understanding of what he's going for all the time, no matter how out there it is. So he's always a director I'm going to kind of trust to do whatever style he's going to do. And that it will have a purpose to the story. So, but like I said, it's the writing itself when the movie gets so kind of standard by the end, regardless of what it looks like. And that's unfortunate. But like I said, we do have, Clairefoy is, good for the most part, but once again, like I said, the parts where it maybe not so much, it just seems to all come back to the writing when it falls apart. And we've got like I said, Jay Farrow, Juno Temple, a really kind of, Jay Farrow in particular, just this really odd bit of casting, yet somehow just kind of works. Like we just kind of accept it pretty quickly, even if he might seem totally out of place at first. And then we've got a very good Amy Irving here as well as her mother. And there are, I mean, it does go, as it's reaching the end, even though it's starting to get dumber, there still are some portions where you do kind of wonder what's going to happen. But it's, yeah. So I was really trying to figure out exactly how to go about this, because the way it looks and what Soderbergh is doing feels like such a bigger part of it than the writing does. So it's like, how much do you really want to criticize the movie as a whole with what the writing did wrong? Because in this type of movie, that's a totally different thing than it would be in another movie. So, yeah, so I can certainly appreciate it. But like I said, like in the last, I don't know, third or so, the direction starts to go just kind of become, just really not in the direction that something like this really should have. Something so straightforward that started so kind of weird and sort of dream and nightmare-like, so that's, yeah. But, yeah, certainly an appreciation for it, so we'll leave it at that. Next week is A Quiet Place. Hopefully I will. I keep forgetting that I still need to see The Stranger, so I should probably go do that at some point this coming week. That would be an interesting double feature, potentially. And then I guess we'll see what else comes along. Like I said, if I happen to hear good things about a Netflix movie, then we'll go in that direction, but I don't know that I want to voluntarily anymore. I just can't do it. So, yes. So until next week, I think we're done.